Okay. So, hi everyone. Hello, regular readers. We're doing something unusual today, as you will already have noticed. First of all, this is a video recording, and that's not a common thing here at the Hinternet. It's also not terribly common to have Agnes Callard with me, though I think it may have happened before. Anyhow, this is my friend Agnes Callard. She's a professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago. Some of you will have heard of her. She does all sorts of different things. So, hi, Agnes.
Hi.
The reason why we're talking today is not just because we're friends, but also because we both discovered I discovered that Agnes had busily been reading the complete works of Émile Zola around the time that I was gearing up to start making some progress on his massive opus myself. So I said to Agnes, why don't I do a bit of reading first, and then we can get together in a few weeks and talk about our impressions. As I've discussed with Agnes already, she and I are both at very different points in our conquest of Zola's massive oeuvre. Agnes is far ahead of me, but I am far enough along, I think, to have some, if not well-formed opinions, at least some strong opinions that I want to share with Agnes and with you all today. But I think, in part because Agnes is in some sense the master here, it makes sense to start with maybe an initial volley of reflections from you, Agnes, about why you've been reading Zola, what the point of taking this on was. It's not a small task. Um, and also kind of what your general appraisal of, say, the literary quality of his work is, but also the historical import of his work. What's your general appraisal of these so far?
Okay, that was a bunch of questions. I'll try to answer all of them. So how I started, I was reading this book. It's a history book called From Peasants into Frenchmen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically about the colonization of France by Paris. It's about sort of how the railways came in and a bunch of other things happened, and these peasant ways of life where they did not speak French, they didn't
Mm-hmm.
have um they didn't share religious practices or ways of life or food or anything. I mean, they were kind of autonomous. These villages had autonomous modes of life, and that ended between like 1870 and 1910. Anyway, it's a super interesting book, and I just learned about all these interesting um uh like little phenomena, some of which uh well, anyway, the important thing is a lot of the evidence was from Zola, right? So I was
Uh-huh.
reading this history book, and like I would read all the footnotes, and it was like references to Zola right and left, and I'm like, you know what? If I think I should read the primary source, basically.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I started. I thought I'd just read one. I picked the one about the trains because the trains were so important. I mean, the trains were what then let people build certain kinds of roads, and then like made access.
This is La Bête Humaine, which
Yes,
is
yes, yes.
sometimes translated as the beast within, but also I think as the human beast, as far as I know.
Exactly. And it's like so what I didn't really know about Zola is that he's kind of trashy and fun. His
Mm.
plots are sort of sexy. There's lots of sex and murder and intrigue and melodrama. So he's very engaging.
Mm.
But it's almost like all that fun stuff, like is as though you were reading a soap opera, is
Mhm.
like this sugarcoating on just this window into a world, like
Mhm.
the world of how the trains are moving in and out,
Mhm.
how they have to deal with like um the temperamental behavior of the trains,
Mhm.
uh and and just the level of detail that he gives you. And I think part of it is, and this is the thing that really draws me to Zola, is that so many novelists seem to have the focus of their novel be on the characters, which is super like natural, right? So their characters somehow have wills of their own and have in some way either a kind of self-determining ability, like if you think of the Bildungsroman, right? It's just this whole genre of self-determination, or if not self-determination, at least a kind of inner life that is a little bit shielded from the world outside, that makes them almost like worthy of being in a novel, right? Whether they're poor or rich or whatever. And Zola's characters are not like that. His characters are a function of their environment.
Yes.
And so obviously a lot of the attention is on the environment, on the social environment, on the physical environment, you know, on how the fruits and vegetables look in the belly of Paris. All this stuff is it's like the inner world is really replaced by this outer world. And there's something super realistic about that. Like that is, most novels tell the story of people being independent of their circumstances in some really deep way, that like that is the story we want to be told about ourselves. The novels, most novels tell us the story we want to hear, and Zola tells us this other story that is not the story we wanted to hear, and thus people have been offended by him, and you know, he was in his own life canceled in a variety of ways, and they didn't like, they felt he was insufficiently glorifying humanity. And I think it's basically this is why, because he doesn't, his characters are not the center of their own story.
So interesting. I would have a lot to say in response to that. I think you didn't specifically answer the second question.
Okay, what was the second question? Sorry.
Your estimation of the literary value of this.
You're right.
But I suppose you kind of did. I mean, I'm getting a 2 thumbs up vibe from you.
No, I think it's more that I am not sure that is a that I tend to evaluate literary works in that way, I guess. So it's like I sort of trust the world to evaluate them. Like I understand that like Henry James is really high class, and like Zola is not as high class as Henry James, and he is seen by the world as like having less literary value. And who am I to question that estimation? And so I don't exactly form my own estimation of those things, I guess, because I don't think I have that much reason to trust my judgment over the collective judgment. So I'm more interested in like, what is it that I can learn from Zola? What is it that he uniquely gives me a window onto? What would be the reason to read him, etc. And I'm interested in comparing him to other novelists and stuff. But yeah, I almost feel like who cares how much literary value I think he has? Even I don't care.
You certainly touched on something really important that I had not yet kind of explicitly thought about before, which is this very curious role that Zola is playing as someone who is simultaneously a novelist and a kind of social scientist, and explicitly so by his own lights. Here he's to some extent, I think, following the model of Balzac. Like Balzac, Zola conceives a multi-volume project. Zola's is called Les Rougon-Macquart, and as I recall, the subtitle is The Social and Natural History of a Family Under the Second Empire, which is to say, under Napoleon III, which is to say, you know, square in the middle of 19th century France. And he's doing this in part for the same reasons a Durkheim or anyone else would take, or Weber would take on the task of writing about our social reality. That is, he wants to shine light on it. If you look at Zola's kind of main reference points in this project. It's also, I think, very much of its time, in contrast, and just as Balzac is very much of his time, very much early 19th century, the points of reference have changed. And I think this is very significant. Zola's social and natural history draws a lot on ideas about evolution, about heredity, and also, I think, betrays a really kind of rigid determinism about people's social roles as something they can't do much about because they're kind of passed down to them by their ancestors. And I take this to be rather bleak, a picture, especially of the lower classes, which is the primary focus of much of this work, especially L'Assommoir, which I've read most recently. It's a depiction of basically the proletarian pathologies of domestic violence and substance abuse in working class Paris, and it is grim. It is unrelentingly grim. And the people trapped in this world don't seem to have much control over their fates at all. But when you say, I mean, something you said just now kind of shifted me out of my kind of apprehensiveness about Zola, which is kind of that in this refusal to focus on interiorities in the way that, say, Henry James is doing at the same time, Zola is actually returning to almost a pre-modern approach to literary representation, something like what you might find in the Icelandic sagas, or maybe even in Greek epic. People are subject to the fates. And this just happens to be a kind of naturalized picture of the fates where it's, the mechanisms of heredity and so on. And if you think about Zola not as just, the pure embodiment of a certain kind of approach to looking at society in the late 19th century, but as a holdout to pre-modern approaches to literary representation, then I start to get excited and think, yeah, I like this again. I don't know. Does any of that make sense to you?
It does make sense to me. So I think that, so first of all, I really don't think overall his focus is on the lower classes. I think that he's roughly, the family divides into roughly these three parts.
Yeah.
And this is like the two novels that you have looked at are from the basically the Macquart part, which is the lower class part. And then the Rougon ones are Rougon, is that how you say it?
Rougon, yeah.
Rougon. Okay, the Rougon ones, I mean, they are so bleak too. Like the upper classes are totally, it's disgusting. Actually, it's much more disgusting.
Right.
His Excellency Jean Rougon and the curé, the kill about anyway, and then the Mouret or the middle class. So he covers everybody, and everybody is a product of their circumstances. He's very egalitarian in that sense. And in fact, I think L'Assommoir really has. It's really interesting that Gervaise is so there are so many choice points for her along this novel, and the slide, her move upwards from the bottom of the novel and then her slide downwards are both really slow. Right? It's not like one thing just upsets the card, and so it's this really and I think what he's trying to do is with her. And he does say in the preface to at least my version of this book that like she's the best character, or the one, like the most positive character in the whole thing. And that's interesting because he has much more unequivocally good characters. Okay. Not many. He mostly, his characters are ones you would not empathize with or care about. But But he has some ones that are like in the one, there's one about a department store, and Denise, the main character of that one, she's just like perfect. She's like virtuous, perfect character, right? So the fact that he says Gervaise is the most positive character, I get why. She's incredibly relatable because her flaw is, it's not like she just has alcoholism in her blood and it's always going to come out. Her flaw is that she wants to accommodate everyone. She wants to be nice and she wants everyone to get along. And he's really careful to be like, at every moment, both her moves up and her moves down come from this just trying to be a nice person, trying to be accommodating. And her sister, Lisa, right, who is the protagonist of, is very similar, in very sort of similar circumstances, also comes to Paris with not much. And their fates diverge a lot, even though they're, they're both in the low class group, right? But things go very differently. The one is like in a meat store and the other one is doing a laundry, but just slight differences in who they associate with. Their fates go in very different directions. And so what I think Zola, like, I don't actually think, even though there is all this stuff about heredity, and I think the actual focus is on sort of social influence, the ways in which his characters respond to their world. At every moment, they're responding to their own world. And I think that, yes, the alcohol and the abuse are big, but like a really big part of it for Gervaise is she kind of begins to indulge herself because she gets exhausted from how hard she's been working. These early moments that don't have anything to do with alcoholism, where she starts paying back less of her loans, eating more treats, right? And there's this, like, it's not I take that to be a very sympathetic kind of claim about the poor.
And totally relatable too.
Right. It's like these poor people are working so incredibly hard and they're able to keep their heads above water if they exercise complete and total discipline at every moment. But relax your discipline even the slightest amount, and then slowly, right, the world creeps in, and like that's the world of the poor. And there's something really perceptive about that, I think.
I think that in fact, it strikes me from my experience of class identity and navigating class identity, certain features of it that I always thought were strictly American, maybe even strictly late 20th century American, the kind of porosity of the bottom layer of the middle class, and the anxiety at that bottom layer of constantly slipping beneath it, is something that really structures the social life of a lot of Americans in fundamental ways, I think. And that's really present in mid-19th century Paris as well, in ways that I hadn't really appreciated. Now, many things are different. One of the most beautiful things, I think, kind of at a factual level, is the description of the ateliers of the working class. I mean, I never really thought about this. What was it to be a member of the working class in 1851? Well, it wasn't to work in a factory. It was mostly to live in a very tightly packed multi-story apartment block, where each apartment is both a home but also a workshop where someone practices a trade that I think by our standards today, these would be considered more artisanal and cool and tickets to the middle class, right? Like hammering gold chains and things like that. That seems kind of cool. But in the context, in the world before factories and labor unions and much of the kind of traits that the working class would take on in the 20th century, it's very, very different, isn't it? But you still have this constant danger of slippage. And indeed, when Gervaise lets herself go and moves from prosperous washerwoman or laundry business woman to the lowest of the low, and ultimately dies on a pile of hay. I'm sorry for the spoiler. It is a natural downward motion. But I got to say, I mean, speaking of choices, there are a few moments where I was just like, okay, this is relatable. Other moments where I was like, what's wrong with you? And one of them is when Gouget gives her a meal when she's starving. Why doesn't she just stick around a bit longer? Why does she have to run away?
Oh, she's so ashamed. I mean, like so you remember earlier where he said like it was the death of Madame Coupeau, where she has to ask him for a little money for the funeral, and he gives it to her, and he's like, but you understand it's over. And I think what Gouget represents to her is, see, he has this really elevated view of her, right? In his eyes, she is just the paragon of respectability, because he watched her nurse Coupeau, and he watched how hard she worked and how she pulled herself up, and that's who she is for him. Like, and that's here is somebody who could see her that way as being respectable. And I think just it's intolerable to her to see how much she's fallen in his eyes, that even past the point where he says, you understand it's all over, he's still giving her some food out of pity, but she like thinks he wants sex, right? And like the whole thing is just this profound humiliation. Where probably like if he were to show up again, even like, you know, later as she's even further starving, in the few pages that still remain at that point in the novel, she would take the food from him. But the running away is just the momentary being just overwhelmed by that shame, that there's still something left of her there, that she's able to feel that shame.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we all just react to shame differently. Maybe it's a gendered thing. I don't know. But like, I feel like at that moment, she could have been just like, okay, we've hit the very lowest level of indignity possible, and now there's still this familiar old face across from me. That's something to build on, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's perceptive of Zola, though, that like basically you have not hit the lowest level of shame until you're dead. There's always further to go.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. That was, I mean, that was the moment that really broke my heart, you know, because I mean, I found myself, as I've confessed, utterly indifferent to many theoretically heartbreaking moments in the novel, because I did tend to take this kind of surfeit of detail about people's misery as you know, what one critic in the era called it, as a sort of pornography. You know, it's just so much and so unrelenting that for me the consequence was really not to care so much about many of these characters. I certainly didn't care about Coupeau when he finally died of alcohol poisoning, but I think Zola was really intentional about that. He didn't want us to care about the person.
I mean, I'm not so sure he wanted us to care about Lali.
Interesting.
That is
She's
like
the little girl who's beaten to death by her father.
Yeah, because you say you don't find yourself feeling much, and I say I kind of agree with you. I feel a lot for Gervais. But I think, like, you know, he this is a world of misery, and I take it he's presenting it accurately, that these things happened and he's showing them to us. And I think that it's like he's not, I don't actually think that he is showing them to us in order to make us feel sympathetic, any more than he's showing us all the work. And I really think this is a wonderful thing about Zola, that he shows us work. I mean, like, he's a kind of novelist that wants work to show the work that human beings do to like show up at a level of detail in his novel. Like, how do you put the gold chains together that they're not, they're black, and then they put them in this thing and then it's red, right?
Yeah.
And you have these details about how do you make gold chains, how do you starch the collar, and how do you iron it, and
right,
you know, the workings of the laundry at the beginning. All this, he's not showing us that because he wants us to admire the work, because he wants us to enjoy it or participate in it. He just thinks this is a really important part of this world, that people do this kind of work. And I think he also thinks it's a really important part of this world that people drink alcohol and hit each other.
Mhm.
And this is the kind of suffering that will show up in this world. It's a fact about the world, just like the work is a fact about the world.
Mhm.
And there's just a little bit less in Zola that's, I think, meant to like orient the reader inside of the world, and that's connected to his taking a more scientific approach, a more like, you know, anthropological, sociological kind of vantage point, where he just like kind of wants to show you it's like um uh it's a little bit, it's a little bit like these really rich fantasy worlds like Lord of the Rings, or um you know, the um these fantasy series, what's the one that with the Game of Thrones, right? These fantasy series that branch out in all these different ways, where they're all, I mean, okay, Lord of the Rings is actually quite moralistic, but like Game of Thrones is not very moralistic.
Mm.
And where they're just trying to show you this, you know, this little world, but the problem is that like the fantasy ones are just really, really low on detail, right?
Mhm.
The amazing thing about Zola is that he can give you a level of detail that you could never get in a science fiction or a fantasy novel,
Right,
because no
right.
one can come up with this stuff out of their own
That
head.
level of, yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, that's so interesting to think about the idea of world building, right? Like
Yeah.
Zola has, in some sense, an obvious advantage because the world he's building has a very clear model already kind of pre-given, right? I hadn't thought of it in that light. But yeah, I mean, the attention to detail is really, really incredible. And it's I think you know, I was away in the United States for 9 months, and I was reading a lot of American literature and a lot of Henry James. And for me, back in Paris for the past month, reading Zola has been like a refamiliarization with the very specific geography of this place, which hasn't changed in many regards since the Second Empire. And kind of going down the streets and going to the different squares and stations and so on with him has been such a powerful way of getting kind of inserted back into the city. I've barely been out of my apartment over the past month, but I feel like I have been. It's incredible, and only someone with that power of descriptive detail could possibly do it.
I'm
Um,
super jealous because I haven't been to Paris in like, I don't know, 15 years or something, and I don't have any real knowledge of the city. But as I'm reading these novels, I so much am lacking. Like I'm feeling like, I wish I had a map in my head to know where, because there, yeah, there is so much detail about, you know, they're not all set in Paris, but
mm,
like most of the ones I've read are set in Paris
yeah,
and have a lot of detail about the geography of Paris. And there's even, you know, ones where they're just, you know, the like the whole, the Baron Haussmann moves to like create these avenues, whatever, that's part of one of them. And
yeah,
I
sure.
don't know where these
Well,
things even are.
yeah,
So
that's all Second Empire, of course. That's Napoleon the Third's big pet project was to kind of get Haussmann to kind of give this place a massive makeover, which meant in part tearing down, for better or worse, a lot of what was here before. And the Paris that we have today is still, by at most angles, visibly Haussmannian. So to see that taking shape in Zola is quite wonderful. But the at least for l'Assommoir, the neighborhood that he describes is very kind of very confined to an area around Poissonnière, which is today a metro station, up to Montmartre. So the parts that would become associated with kind of the bohemian painterly life around Pigalle, I think, you know, probably more or less around the same time, down to the Louvre. That's the whole
right.
the whole area of motion of these people. I don't think they ever go further. I don't think they ever cross the Seine once. Well, no, except Lantier runs away. Lantier runs away at the very beginning
Right.
with some other girl, and he goes to Glacière, which is on the left bank of Paris,
Okay, I didn't even know that. So
and it's treated like another world. Like, okay, he's
right.
on the left bank of Paris. I can't possibly go and chase him and bring him back. That's the attitude. But anyhow, I'm kind of rambling about this, but the whole area is kind of in the process of becoming a massive modern but still working class kind of neighborhood, which is, I think, something quite peculiar that of which Paris is probably the vanguard, being both modern and working class, right? Cutting
Yeah.
edge and working class. It's quite amazing.
I think there's something I got from reading the thing you wrote in your Substack. I can't remember whether it's what you said or what I inferred from what you said, but it's like, so Law got a bit lucky in terms of what time he was living in. That is, he was living in, I mean, in the time, there's a reason why he became the source for this historical novel, for this historian's work. This novel, this time of, the transition to a very different kind of culture and economy.
Mhm.
And so in a number of these novels, like in one of them, the one that's it's in English translated The Lady's Paradise, Au Bonheur des Dames,
Oh
that
yeah.
one is about a department store. That one's very explicitly just about this transition.
Oh,
And
wonderful.
then
Yeah.
some of the novels about the Rougon are about the Baron-House and the
Yeah.
changing of the streets and all that. But even in L'Assommoir, you have this wonderful scene where Gervaise visits Gouget, right? And they have first this contest over making,
Oh yeah.
he and the other guy have this contest over making bolts, like metal bolts, and they each have a hammer, and each hammer has a name.
Right.
And they're competing, and Gouget wins, and it's this triumph. And
Right.
then he takes Gervais to the machine that is making, like, the bolts super quickly. And he basically says, like, this is the future, and we're all going to be destroyed by this. This is going to substitute for us, this machine. And he even says something like, look, maybe it's for the best.
Yeah.
And so it's not just he's interested in work, and he's interested in the transformation of work, because he was living at this time where he's watching this
Yeah.
transition. And in a kind of, what I really like about Zola is that he looks at this transformation with this incredible amount of dispassion. Like,
Yeah.
he can just see both sides. I mean, that's especially true in the department store novel, where you watch this department store coming into being, and you watch it displacing all the little glove store, umbrella store, etc., and just destroying lives right and left.
Mhm.
Suicides, deaths, like misery everywhere from this department store. On the other hand, the department store is just a wonder. It's like a wonder of the world as this thing gets bigger and bigger. And
So we see that
as
this is just kind of a general rule um, of disruptive developments in history, right?
right. Right. And so, but Zola was just lucky to live at a time when there were just a whole lot of these disruptive developments.
Mhm.
And so I think a lot of his novels either feature either in the background or the foreground a disruption like this. So it's not just that he's doing this, like, natural history description of, because that could be very static. It's this very
Mhm.
dynamic natural
Yeah.
history. It's like,
Yeah.
watch people under conditions of change.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe again, that's one of the key differences between Balzac writing in the early 19th century and Zola. And this is something I've been harping on, that Balzac's reference point for his natural history is Buffon, the great author of the 18th century Histoire naturelle, and Buffon is an anti-evolutionist, and thinks of the order of things as somehow fixed and stable, right?
Right.
And so this is a major floodgate that opens, I think, between the two authors'
Hmm.
respective eras. But of course, this also brings to mind La Bête Humaine and again, the railroad. And there, I don't know, I'd be interested to know what you think. Have you seen the Renoir movie version of La Bête Humaine? Um,
No, I've been meaning to, and there's apparently a TV series about the department store one.
Oh,
a
wow.
series, like
Oh, yeah,
multiple
yeah. I think I
series.
read about that. Yeah, yeah.
So I'm
The,
definitely I'm planning to watch it.
the
But yeah,
Renoir film is incredible. It's considered, it's 1938, and it's considered often to be one of the pioneering works of the film noir genre, right? So it's like it kind of creates a mood that will be completely familiar in a certain kind of movies by the 1950s. But in any case, I think both the novel and the film draw out a kind something that maybe uh, complicates what you just said about Zola's dispassionate view of technological change, because there does seem to be a connection between Jacques Lantier's how should we put it, psychosexual twistedness,
yeah.
um, and and the fact that he's a locomotive conductor, right? And he seems to be warped in the particular way he is, that seems to mirror whatever it is that train is doing, right?
Well, that's interesting. So I really didn't. He certainly has. He certainly messed up, and so he's for me one of the most mysterious characters in all of Zola. And I mean at the literal level of where did he come from? Because he is not listed in any of the other novels, right? So like we have this novel L'Assommoir, and Jacques should have been the child of
Yeah,
Gervaise
he
and
is.
Lantier. He's not mentioned.
Yeah, he is very, very early on. You got to go back because there's
In
Etienne.
L'Assommoir, he's mentioned.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, then I just missed it because I was like, "Where's Jacques?
no, no, it's
Did
true.
they leave him behind in Plassans?"
No, no, he's in Paris in the first few pages, when Lantier comes back and gets and picks up his chest in order to
No,
move.
that's Claude and Etienne.
Oh, you're right. It's Claude. It's not Jacques. You're right.
Claude is the one who becomes the artist, and Etienne is the one who ends up in La Terre. Jacques does
Oh,
not show up,
you're
and
right.
he's
You're
not
right.
mentioned in the first
Excuse
novel
me.
either.
Excuse me. I was too quick to tell you you were wrong and I was wrong. Um,
There's
um,
a lot of names in these novels. It is
yeah,
crazy trying to keep track of them.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Jacques is, I feel that what Zola did was he like retroactively inserted someone into the family history, clearly because he wanted to work out a certain line, a certain something that he hadn't done. It's like a relatively later one of the novels.
Yeah.
And
And
so far I have not encountered any other example.
he does explicitly say that the two, that Lantier and Gervais, had two boys. You know, there's never any mention of a boy left behind in Soissons.
Exactly.
So
Right.
I think you're right. Yeah,
Right. It's
sorry,
just a
not
weird.
Soissons, Provence. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, like I mean, of course, it could be that there was one that was left behind, but yeah, as I said, there's no mention of it.
Yeah.
I find it very, very odd, right? And so clearly he just decided to add a character at some point, and
Yeah.
that's uncharacteristic because otherwise, at least as far as I can track, he's super consistent.
Yeah.
Um, and so he wanted to tell a story about a certain kind of mental illness. I think that it's like it's both hereditary, but also develops in a weird way because it's not the alcoholism exactly of the rest of the family, right? But the thing is, so I mean, La Bête Humaine is really dark. In that, like, there's no one you like, there's no one you even can like in that novel, even a little. I mean,
Right.
Séverine is like, she's terrible. They're all terrible. There's only one possible object on which your affections could land in that novel, and that is the train La Liaison, which is always described in really like beautiful and affectionate terms, and it's really hardworking. It's described, I don't know the language literally because I'm reading in English, but some of the same terms in which Gervaise is described, like a really hard worker, really consistent. And when that train is killed, it really feels like the train is killed at the point with the crash and just the
Yeah.
and so I really don't there's a way in which I don't connect Jacques Lantier with that beautiful, wonderful train that he injures. He's responsible for injuring her, right? In some of his wildness and his badness is in fact kind of like it is like she's the canvas onto which it's painted because he
Oh,
mistreats her, right? This one good thing in this whole novel.
interesting. Yeah.
And um so I guess, yeah, like that was I do feel like, I mean, the place where I sort of agree with you is that the, you know, Jacques Lantier, it was only as a train conductor that sort of like something that was good and regular in him could come out. So it's sort of like the avenue within which a lot of his insanity does not get expressed. Of course, then it does too eventually.
Mhm.
But I guess there's a way in which like there was something he was good at, you know. Even
Mhm.
in that novel, you have the idea of work and you have the idea of
Mhm.
being good at your job, and even like, you know, evil psycho guy could be good at his job, and
Mhm.
there could be something sort of beautiful in that. And it's in his relationship with La Liaison is like the only good relationship in the,
Yeah,
at least
yeah,
for a while,
that's
in the
so
novel.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I was reading it, and I think other people tend to read it. I don't think I'm the only one who does this as a kind of 19th century anticipation of, like, Charlie Chaplin style modern times critique of
I
the
see, I see,
big
I see.
machine. But I actually think you could be right. Yeah, this is not modern times. This is something more like what you described earlier in the scene at the factory with Gouget in L'Assommoir,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, the thing in favor of your interpretation, like the very end of the novel where the train is just rattling off on its own, like very much has that feel of
Mhm.
we've unleashed this beast or something like that. You know, by that point we're not dealing with the good train, the liaison. It's like so I do think um there is something to that, but for a lot of the novel, there's just a lot of respect for the
Mm.
mechanics of the train and the train station.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, and also the station manager, who turns out to be as rotten as everyone else, even though that was one of the great disappointments I've had so far in Zola, because there's this sweet marriage between him and Séverine, and you think they're going to be sweet at first. Like the very first introduction is sweet people, and also an orderly person who values the maintenance of the rules of the station and so on. And then they just descend into
Pretty
terrible
quickly.
conniving very quickly. And I have to say, I found that abrupt. I found that, like, what is the logic of the character development here? But you know
I agree about that one. I think that's right. He's not really thinking much about character development there. It is very sudden.
yeah, so yeah, I mean, La Bête Humaine, I think, is very compelling, in part because it really is the signature technology, I think, more than telecommunications. It's the shrinking of geographical distance through this network that really is something that Zola is trying to get a handle on, and that is, I think, more important than the cog factory or whatever it is that Gouget does, right?
Right.
The forgeron. Um, Le Ventre de Paris. That's also, I mean, that's also just wonderful for the geography of Paris, though, Les Halles, where it takes place, which was traditionally the central open market of the city, has for, like, I don't know, the past generation or so been under perpetual construction.
Yeah.
And there are even movies now in which this is a running joke. And there's also some kind of horrible mall there, and it's also a major kind of transit hub for the metro and the RER. So everyone avoids Les Halles. And so here it's a case of seeing a part of Paris that just doesn't exist anymore, and it's quite wonderful, and it really brings it to life. And of course, the famous scene of the cheese symphony, as they call it sometimes. Though here it's funny. I often think about this. So cheese is a funny word, right? In
Mm.
English. And the idea of a symphony of cheese just sounds funny. Symphonie de fromage is not funny. It actually
Mm.
sounds elegant, right? And I mean, that scene where he's describing these smells is funny, and it's funny because it's such a level of naturalism. There's so much that it seems actually to kind of generate the smells just in reading it.
Yeah.
But this is all to say, I think it would have been even funnier in English.
Mm.
What do you make of Le Ventre de Paris in general?
I loved the descriptions of food,
Mm-hmm.
just the vegetables and things, like the colors. Somehow, there's one other novel, the one about the sin of Abbe Mouret,
Mm.
uh, that has as much description of like nature stuff, but it's plants there, and it's not like food. Um, and so that's I mean I read that one, The Belly of Paris, now a little while ago, but the thing that stuck with me was that um and these kind of wars over reputation that
Mm-hmm.
seem like, so in a way that, the woman who sells the fish versus the woman who sells the meat, and like these kind of the fighting wars by way of who they can lure over to their side, and the way in which that turns the whole marketplace into this like tiny little world, this tiny little battleground,
Yeah.
where there are all these signifiers that like you wouldn't have known if you just
Yeah.
stumbled in there,
Yeah.
in terms of whose daughter gets to play with whom.
Yeah.
um and uh so like it's a neighborhood, but it very much feels like the neighborhood is its own world, like it's not
Yeah.
even connected to the rest of Paris.
Yeah. It's incredible. Yeah. The description of kind of spontaneous hierarchies that emerge,
Right.
like just absolutely everywhere. How, whether you notice it or not, I think is really Zola as social scientist or participant observer really at his best, you know. Um, so you're much further ahead than I am, as we've discussed. I noticed when I was lurking on Twitter that you had categorized the different novels according to their perceived quality. I mean, what makes the difference for you between the best, the kind of middling, and then the kind of not so great when it comes to Zola?
So, somebody asked me to do it, so I did it very much. I did not put a lot of thought into my piles.
Hmm.
I think that, um, I really, I guess I was thinking, which ones am I going to remember, and which ones am I already starting to forget?
Hmm.
Um, um, and uh, I that's like I just find, I mean, I think you did as well. The Drinking Den is just very compelling, and I somehow did not expect to find it compelling. I
Hmm.
expected to be disappointed by it,
Hmm.
because, and like Nana, I expected to think was really good,
Hmm.
because it was I had heard of it, and I really like. I think actually, I don't know. I think I maybe put it in the middle one, but I now reflecting, I've already moved it down to the bottom of the bottom tier. So the I didn't expect, and I didn't expect to like the department store one as much as I did.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe so now if I try to think harder about why are some of these memorable, um, it is that in some of these novels, the plot, I love plot. Like,
Hmm.
I'm an old-fashioned reader. I like when, there's like a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there's a structure and whatever, where the plot and the um different snippets of worlds just work together really well,
Hmm.
right? Because it's like Zola's doing two things at the same time. He's trying to give you an exciting plot, and he's trying to just show you a lot of scenes of a certain segment of the society.
Hmm.
And sometimes it feels like those two things pull against one another, and sometimes it feels like they work together really well. And I think the ones that I really liked, like the department store one and Drinking Den, are ones where they work together, where the two things are like actually amplifying each other.
I wanted to point out that the La Bête Humaine and the department store one and l'Assommoir, or the Drinking Den, all have a significant non-human protagonist, right? Um, and it's in all three cases, I think it's kind of the same. It's this kind of massive kind of lurking juggernaut that human beings have brought into existence, the locomotive, the department store. And in L'Assommoir, this is something we didn't emphasize, but Zola brings it back again and again, the figure of the giant, what is still in the drinking establishment, with
Yeah.
its kind of quasi-tentacle like arms that come out of which the eau de vie pours. And he explicitly calls it on several occasions la machine à saouler. So like the machine, the drunk making machine, right?
Ah,
Um, um, and this is, this follows the model in French, like la machine à écrire, the typewriter, or la machine à coudre, the sewing machine. To call it a la machine à saouler, very kind of overtly turns it into a kind of teleological contraption, so to speak,
right.
in a way that makes it something very sinister because it's killing people off.
Right.
Um, and yeah, so I think all three of these great novels in the oeuvre have this share this quality of having a non-human protagonist.
True, but some of the non-great ones do too.
Mm.
So
Oh, yeah.
um in The Kill, there's this house that Zola hates so much. He describes it with just so much like disgust. It's this very fancy sort of new, like nouveau riche type house of one of the Rougon that got really rich quickly and made this like super fancy house and this super fancy bedroom in the house. And um and it the house as a whole, but also this one particular bedroom and the draperies in the room are described. They're definitely a character, but they're like an evil character in the
Mm.
novel.
Oh,
um
wow.
yeah, and in Potluck, the apartment building that that's one's about an apartment building in which a bunch of people live together, and it's a more like middle class apartment building. And I
Mhm.
think you could make the case, especially the stairway of that building. So this is a thing that he likes to do, is sort of become a bit obsessed. Oh yeah, and in the first one there's this plot of land. So I think it happens actually in a lot of them. The ones that you've picked out are the best examples of it, I think.
Mhm.
So I think that's right. Um, but it sort of shows up in a lot of places that it's almost like Zola thinks the borderline between like when you have a character and when you don't doesn't necessarily map onto is it a human being or not.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's quite wonderful. I hadn't really thought about how flexible he is in that regard. Yeah. So are you almost done then with Les Rougon Macquart? Or are you
I mean, I think I have like, I don't know, 7 or 8 more left. So I mean, I
Mhm.
still got a fair amount to go. I'm looking forward to the rest of them.
Well, I guess I confess I'm reading Balzac again right now. I'm reading
I'm gonna do Balzac afterwards because I only
and
read I think one Balzac, and I
uh, I
uh
I think Balzac is one of the great thinkers of the 19th century. I really
mm,
think that he is onto something. But he is decidedly working in a different frame of reference. And it's actually, I think, very um curious, perhaps, to alternate back and forth between the two. Uh,
mm,
because their projects are so similar. They really do want to give you an exhaustive account of the state of the world at their
yeah.
moment, right? So it's and again, it's in both cases, I think, derived from 18th century encyclopedism, and also 18th century natural history. And really, the more I think about it, really key for understanding the birth of the social sciences in the 19th century. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like, suppose there isn't yet really anything like social science, and that's sort of what you wanted to do. Like this is how you would do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I think I'm going to keep alternating, but it's going to take me a while. I mean, maybe 20 years from now. Though I mean, for about a decade, I was like, I think I'm too old. I don't think I'm ever actually going to be able to read all of Proust. But then once I decided to do it, I got done in under a year. So it's all just what you how you prioritize, I guess.
I also just think I don't spend that much time reading Zola. Like I'll
Yeah,
read him like a little bit before I go to sleep. But if you read like every night a little bit
yeah,
before you go to sleep,
yeah,
it adds up.
yeah. That's my thing. 30 pages or so per day is enough to make it add up. But it's a huge project, and it's incredible um how 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 vast the scope of these projects was. My favorite 19th century French author remains, however, Flaubert, who wrote next to nothing by comparison. He was extremely perfectionist, fastidious, cautious, and always dissatisfied with what he'd produced. And it's a very, very different way of writing, and a very different scope of ambition too. You like Flaubert?
I do. But I'm thinking I only read Madame Bovary.
Oh,
Is
okay, yeah, yeah,
Flaubert that
yeah.
I what
Uh,
should be my next Flaubert? I read it in French. I think I
yeah.
read it in French and then I read it in English to really understand it. So but what should be my next Flaubert that I read?
The shorter, you couldn't really call them short stories, but the like maybe novella length works, like Saint-Julien l'Hospitalier, I think is just incredible. And The Temptation of Saint Anthony. And he's effectively adapting medieval legends of the saints um,
Mm.
into 19th century style. And he just lets himself go crazy with it. I think it's just fantastic. Um, but anyhow, it's a very different kind of project than Zola's, and I think ultimately Zola's is more influential, not just for like writer as kind of observer of real society, but also for 20th century arts and entertainments, for cinema. I think it's really, really important.
Mm.
Anyhow, yeah. So yeah, let's do this again soon. This is fun.
Okay.
Um, we should pick a different author or set of books, or just kind of check back in a while and see what kind of progress we've made, what we've been
Okay,
reading.
great.
Okay, talk to you soon, Agnes. Nice to
Okay.
see you. Bye bye.
Bye.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to eliminate this part,
I
but
think that the viewers
oh,
will enjoy this part the
here we go.
best.
Okay, bye guys.